So I would like to welcome you all to this discussion today, like a good old-time discussion. We've got all the panelists here on the panel, and you're just in front. We have also our viewers, and you'll be encouraged to ask questions online too. But having you and the panelists in front is promising in terms of discussion. So I'm very happy. My name is Florent Massiac. I'm Deputy Secretary General of the Austro-French Center for Rapprochement in Europe in Vienna. And today we'll be discussing the Conference on the Future of Europe and les grands débats, the big debates about the future of Europe. This discussion is part of a two-year initiative we have launched together with the Friedrich Ebert Stiftung, so to try to build this vision from the Western Balkans on the future of Europe. And Anita and Jovana, you've been closely working on this project in the past 18 months. Of course, discussions on the future of Europe are not recent. We've been discussing the future of Europe for quite a time now. If you remember, almost exactly 20 years ago, the Laeken Declaration was adopted. And it was concluding a process, a one-year process called Debates on the Future of Europe. So this was what we were doing 20 years ago, basically. At that time, also 20 years ago, you had prominent politicians taking the floor and presenting their vision. A little bit what President Macron did in La Sorbonne, but earlier, much earlier, think about Fischke's speech at the University of Humboldt, so on the finality of European integration. We were talking about setting a European federation back at that time. Think about Jacques Chirac's speech on our Europe, also 2001 at the Bundestag. He was speaking about a federation of European states. These were the ambitions we had 20 years ago. Dejan, I'll start with you. So you're a professor at University of Zagreb. The topic of federalism, the view, the finality of European integration is something which has been around for quite some time. But I have the feeling that these days, it's not there. We are talking about the future of Europe in functional times, in what kind of strategic priorities we would like to set. Are we missing something by not talking about what's the finality? How should it look like in the end?
I think what we are missing is the topic that obviously was very divisive and controversial. Also because to define Europe in ultimate terms is almost impossible. We're talking of an idea, and that idea is now already seen some kind of changes and evolution in its relatively long period of existence since the formation of the first European institutions. And also the Europe is, as an idea, is also a construct. So there are very many Europes in people's minds, and I think that's pretty much normal, and it's very difficult to agree if we need to really define it in some concepts, very firm concepts such as federation or confederalism or whatever, state or whatever it is. I think it would be really difficult. So I do agree that basically we have moved on from this attempt to use constitutional and legal terms, such as federation or whatever it means, into the area of functionality. So, for example, I mean, if you look at the topics that are debated within this big debate or the conference on the future of Europe, I mean, here we have 9 identified as the main ones. Even on these issues, of course, we will see a lot of pluralism. So, I mean, we remember also these debates about widening or deepening of Europe and so on. But, I mean, as with any other concept, and here if I can also make some parallel with the Balkans. I mean, people sometimes, desperately try, first of all, to define what the Balkans is, but it's impossible, just like it is impossible to define Europe. It's an open concept, open to changes, open to imagination. And, these 5 simple questions that every journalist knows is at the beginning of the news, and this is like, who, what, where, why, and when. If you ask them who is Europe and who is not, when is somebody ready to become Europe and when not, if there is such a moment, why there is a Europe, and is Europe the same as the European Union, and so on and so forth. I mean, these are very difficult questions. So obviously this time some of these questions are avoided for the sake of functionality.
For the sake of functionality. Well, Schuman used to say Europe will not be done so in one day and not according to a plan, indeed. That's the limitation we have when we think about this concept of federalism, but they might be helping to grasp what the idea, the inspiration behind.
But also, if I may, I mean, just briefly, I mean, you know, we had this debate in former Yugoslavia all over the time, whether this is a federation or a nation state or a confederalist federation or something. And there is no ending to debates like that. It is, to a degree, a sui generis institution that is difficult somehow to shape.
Thank you. If we still look a little bit back how it used to be done, this debate on the future of Europe 20 years ago, another thing is striking. In the early 2000s, leaders of Central European states were voicing their vision before being member states, invited or not. For instance, you have interviews of Viktor Orban, at that time he was 37, Prime Minister already of Hungary, saying, we would like to see Europe based on nations. He was rejecting already 2 decades ago a European superstate or the idea of federalism too, delegating competences. It was 20 years ago. There's basically no surprise in what we see nowadays. On the other side, we had in the Czech Republic, Václav Havel, a speech in the European Parliament, February 2000, calling the EU to become a supranational community, calling on the EU to adopt a constitution. These were visions of countries which were about to join the EU, voiced before they were in. So, Jovana, you're Vice President of the United Reform Action. So it's a bit a political question. I ask you to comment on the visions of leaders in the region which might have been voiced. Do we know what the leaders have as a vision for Europe in terms of finality, in terms of how it should look like?
Well, since I've joined the politics just 4 months ago, and I was discussing this topic within the civil society, within the same project as Anita and you, I guess that my answer shouldn't have been different at the moment because of the current position. I guess that the leaders of the Western Balkans are interested in the topic of the European Union and Europe just as a goal for the Western Balkan countries to join the EU as soon as possible. If you ask them what the EU should look like, the EU which we would like to join, I think that they are happy with the way the EU is shaped now. And just to clarify, not in a way that they are not thinking about the better the EU, but they are pretty much happy the way the EU is monitoring the reforms and the state of democracy and the rule of law in the Western Balkan countries. So in order to have the vision of the better Europe, the Western Balkan leaders should have the vision of better our countries and our region. And in a way, they are not that much into reforms, not that much into the EU agenda. And they are, the EU is present in their commitments just in a way to express their readiness to join it and to be prepared and to gain more voters and to make pressure on the public in a way that we are ready and happy to fulfill all criteria. But about future of Europe, there is a huge difference, as I said, between the vision of the EU and Europe from the leaders and by the leaders and from the civil society, as we discussed this topic in 4 countries, with 6 countries in a way representatives of the civil society from all 6 Western Balkan countries. I think that the citizens of the Western Balkans have better vision of the EU than those in the EU itself. Because what we would like to see in the future when it comes to the EU and Europe is the EU which cares about fundamentals, the rule of law, democracy, which transformative power is well and alive, which actually is there to protect its citizens, to work on citizens' initiatives, and to be really the one EU which was initiated in 1992 in Maastricht, as you said, the vision of the EU as a political union, which now is really completely in the background. As the one which researched this topic for some time, and the lack of democracy at the EU level, one of my works was concluded with the conclusion that the federal elements in the political system of the EU should prevail. But since this is the topic and this is the scenario which is pushed by French President Macron, and the reasoning is that the EU should be stronger in order to be bigger, I guess this one should be on hold, or at least to go in parallel with this scenario of the Western Balkans joining the EU and strengthening the enlargement process as such. So to conclude, the leaders of the Western Balkans are not pushing this topic in the public discourse in the Western Balkans. They have not initiated any, let's say, concrete steps to be included in the conference on the future of Europe. They've been invited to participate, but just like, you know, for short remarks, but they were not. I guess that just Montenegro was there. Civil society was included in the last discussion just weeks ago. But as I said, the vision of the civil society and the leaders in the Western Balkans is completely different when it comes to the future of Europe.
It's interesting, you're delineating so very ambitious vision in the end of what the political union should be about. So actually not only rule of law, fundamental rights, but democracy, which is a bit different. The EU is quite well equipped with rule of law and fundamental rights. What is missing is democracy is a little bit more complicated. We need to have a stronger democracy, we need to have to constitutionalize democracy. We don't have a definition, we don't have this is a bit missing. We don't have a sort of strong civic education, European civic education, to push to create this democratic culture in the EU at the European level. So that's all vision which goes way beyond just the standards of rule of law and fundamental rights. Anita, you're director of the Foreign Policy Institute in Bosnia-Herzegovina. You've been associated very closely with this project, reflecting about this vision. What is the European Union, the Western Balkans, wish to join? How should it look like? And clearly, as Jovana says, there is a difference between what the leaders are striving for and what the aspirations of the society are. We have had many discussions in groups, in conferences, and so on. What are your takes? What are the ideas you can take from these discussions about these visions from the society in the region?
Thank you, Floran. Well, firstly, I would like to say, after Jovana's speech, like our leaders, who definitely did not recognize the opportunity to be involved in these debates, to be involved in these discussions about the future of Europe, and the ones who needed to make that pressure on European Union officials to involve us. On the other hand, civil society representatives are here and we want to be involved in the process. Although officially we are not part of the conference on the future of Europe, we are the ones who are the citizens of Europe, and we are the ones who want to be asked about our needs, and the one who wants to give our own opinion about the situation, and we want to give our own opinion about the Europe that we want to live in. Because if we start from the very beginning, when we started discussing about the Conference on Future of Europe, and when we started getting and receiving the confusing messages from the European Union officials about someone is for Western Balkans to be included, someone is not when it comes to member states. But again, let's be honest, we are all the citizens of Europe. Maybe the Western Balkan countries are not the member states, but we as the citizens are the citizens who live in Europe, and the citizens who have to have the saying about the Europe, about the shape of the Europe that we want to be involved in and that we want to live in. So this was the chance for the EU leaders, and this was the chance for our leaders to involve the citizens and to ask the citizens to say, this is something that I want to do, these are our needs, we want to be involved. But anyhow, we are involved within these conferences, we are involved within this kind of events, panels that we are making, and in this regard, we can get our voices to be heard. And in this events, we are organizing the panels with civil society organizations, with academia representatives. We are the voices of our public. So you mentioned that I work in Foreign Policy Initiative BH, and we thought that it's really important for the Western Balkan countries to have the youth voice from the Western Balkan countries to be heard, because the situation that is happening in our countries, that is happening in Western Balkan countries, is something that is directly affecting the youth from the Western Balkan countries, and it's directly affecting their own future. So in Western Balkan countries, we already have the brain drain that is a trend that is already leaving devastating socioeconomic consequences in the region, and we thought that the inclusion of the new perspectives into discussion is something that may contribute to forming more effective strategies in this regard. I will just make one example. Within the initiative, Let's Build the Future Together, the EU and the Western Balkans from the youth perspective, we as the group of civil society organizations from Western Balkans, together with our colleagues from the EU member states, we created the manifesto with the demands coming from the young people from the Western Balkans, but also from the ones who live already in the EU member states. And this manifesto was also contributed by others who live in these countries. And in the end, all the demands are the same. So the challenges and problems that young people are facing in the Western Balkans are the same as the ones that the young people are facing in the European Union. So in this regard, it seems that young people from Western Balkan countries are included, are involved, and their voices can be heard. So within this initiative that started with Think for Europe Network, our partners in Brussels and our partners in Italy and Poland, we had the opportunity to present all the demands within the EU officials, and just to show that we are there, that we can be included, and that not everything is about the enlargement, that not everything is about a accession process, that we can give our own opinion about other and different issues. Moreover, by the participation of the Balkan countries in these debates, I think that this will develop mutual benefit, not only for the Western Balkan countries and cooperation among our countries, but also for the European Union, because firstly, our region will feel that we are more included, that we are more closer to the European Union, and I think in this regard that can foster this integration process. Secondly, as I mentioned in the beginning, the future of Europe is the future of the citizens of Western Balkan countries as well, and in this regard they will have a role in shaping this future with all the officials and citizens coming from European Union. Also, by allowing the region to witness and to contribute to this initiative, I think that this would foster a sense of togetherness and partnerships that has been lacking for such a long time by this drawn-out formal accession process that is present and that is present in the countries, and by all these political issues that are on a daily basis present in our countries and that our leaders are always putting in the first row. One more important issue, in my opinion, is that if we have the EU and the Western Balkan cooperation and coordination, we will definitely build trust and loyalty, and within the Western Balkan countries, with this we will strengthen the feeling of belonging to the European family. So we do not want to be uninvited guests always. but we want to be someone who will be involved. Okay, do not focus on our leaders, but focus on the citizens and focus on different initiatives that we are trying to push forward to the European Union. Finally, all the number of problems that and issues that EU is facing at the moment cannot be successfully resolved without joint work, without joint vision, be it fight organized crime, be it migration, be it environment protection, for example, green agenda. We have the situation that the air pollution, which is a huge problem in our countries, is going to the European Union, to the member states, and there is no that invisible wall that will stop it. So in this regards, we need joint vision, we need joint initiatives, and definitely we should be involved to help solving all these problems, and this will show to the citizens that other perspective.
Thank you. So you touched upon several topics, but if I summarize, we have two very important ones. If we think in terms of vision, what we can project. One is democracy, so the other one is youth empowerment. You also touched upon the Conference of the Future of Europe, how to associate the best way the countries of the Western Balkans in this conference. The conference has not short-lived, but shorter than we thought, maybe. But the exercise is longer. But before you react to both, I would like, because we can take very concrete examples when we think about the vision of Europe. If the Europe is a Europe with this transformative agenda, promoting democracy. 15 years ago, Merkel presented her priorities for the Council, the presidency of the Council, German presidency, and she was launching a series of podcasts, and one of the topics she pointed at is the borders of the EU. The borders. She said, we need to say where the EU ends. I would like to ask you, Diane, well, what do we choose in the end? Do we choose our commitments to promotion of democracy and recognition that some countries in the East, for instance, are European, so provided they meet standards, then the door should be opened. This is the preamble of the Treaty of Rome. Or do we center and go for saying, no, it has to stop somewhere?
Right. I mean, there are many questions and aspects here opened. First of all, about the vision. We will never have the same vision on anything if we live in a democracy and in a pluralistic society. So to expect to have the same vision on Europe is an illusion, I think. And we should stop trying to do something that we will never be able to finish. It's a good exercise. Well, you know, what is Europe? And then we can discuss this in academic circles and things. But if we insist that the vision of Europe is the same in Western Balkans as it is in the European Union as it is at the moment, or even within the European Union, I think that is departure from political realism. Political realism is that we should think of Europe in different ways. And of course, we know that there are very different ideas about what Europe is within the European Union, also based on ideological and political orientations. You know, the Europe that is based on secularism, enlightenment, interest-based, and so on, is not the same as Europe that is imagined as primarily a Christian community, therefore community of traditions and other issues related with conservatism in political spectrum. And you know, it's perfectly permissible that we have both Europes coexisting in people's minds within one country and certainly in a wider area. Now, when you asked about the issue of borders, well, it also depends what is Europe. I mean, if we think of Europe as a state, then yes, it needs to have borders. And it needs to have institutions, it needs to have elections, it needs to have citizenship and so on and so forth, a sense of loyalty to a degree and so on. But is really the idea of European Union being a state, is this something that we can agree on? You know? And I think from Merkel's position, and going back to this, I mean, she comes from conservative spectrum. Conservative spectrum is more realist-based in international relation theory concepts. And it does, in a way, is state-based. I mean, it thinks states are not only the primary actors of international politics, but it's also maybe even the only actors of European politics. And so therefore, if the European Union is not a state, then what it is? Does it exist in international order as such? Yeah. Does it have, can it be a remarkable actor in international politics? And we talk a lot about these years about strategic autonomy within the European Union. We have this conservative-based more geopolitical commission, right? I mean, this all comes from a particular group or an ideological orientation within the European Union, and I think it is now dominating in European space, due to liberal views being somewhat weaker than they used to be, let's say, in the 1990s. And so we need to adapt to these new realities. If we think, for example, of Europe as a kind of benevolent empire, which is not making nations, which is not like nation state, it's not making nation, it doesn't need to have clear borders, but it's permanently expanding. It's not based on homogeneity, but rather on heterogeneity of its population and various views. But it's also based on the idea of higher cultures being European values, apparently commonly shared, and lower values, lower cultures, which need to be taught how to become European, and which need to be somehow supervised in transition to becoming European, and which also, however, involves degrees of Orientalism, inequality towards the others, prejudice and stereotyping the others, based on some historical and other reasons. In that case, of course, we don't need to have a border. Empires don't have clear borders. Empires expand. and therefore, it is not something. So it's imagining Europe that is at the core of all this. Now, and then finally, the third point. The third point was about inclusion of people. How can people be included? Well, I'm not surprised that people who live in the countries that are not members of the European Union, they don't get involved in some of these debates, when many people who are from the members of the European Union actually also seem to be not really very much interested in the European project. And it's good that they're not hostile to it. And they became hostile in, I don't know, Brexit saw this, really, the strength of this like animosity towards the European Union concept. And whether this is rational or not, I liked very much what Mr. Šutanovec earlier said. We are not only left and right, we are also up and down, head and heart. So rational, interest-based thinking and emotions. We need to take into account somehow both. I think for people in the Western Balkans, I think that's my instinct at least, and I see, of course, there's a growing skepticism in Serbia and among the Serbs in Bosnia and Herzegovina. There is still high degree of support among Albanians in Albania and in Kosovo, and others seem to be like pretty much somewhere in between, indifferent, like in Croatia they were before Croatia joined the European Union, in which 58% of the people did not even participate in a referendum on EU membership. Therefore, they didn't seem to be very much keen or interested in EU membership. So I think the key, however, issue is about recognition. It is about being recognized as equal to those who are already in the European Union. It is about delivering on expectations that these people had when they formed independent states. Some of them willingly, others because they were left independent after the collapsing of Yugoslavia. So they expected to be recognized. To be recognized doesn't mean the state only to be recognized, then to be recognized as equal, as part of the project, just like us, not as somebody who needs to wait for a Godot of 30 years or something like that. They will never come. And therefore you feel betrayed, you feel excluded, you feel frustrated, you feel unequal, and so on and so forth. So for many people in Europe, this is a psychological moment. European Union is a provider of recognition that you are A, normal, not abnormal, B, that you are subject, not an object, and see that that you deserve to be treated as equal. And that's why I think that waiting further for EU membership of the countries of Western Balkans is actually not a neutral act. They will not remain the same. They will go worse because they will feel more and more excluded and more treated unfairly. And this is not a good ally in foreign policy. And certainly not in strategic policy. When we talk about, we are in the security forum, so it also presents a risk from a security point of view. Sense of being rejected for us as people. When you feel you are rejected by somebody and you don't quite know why, and you don't feel that you are so much different and worse than than those who have rejected you, that sense of rejection can actually, you may withdraw from reality, but you may also go to the other side and become an enemy or become an opponent, so to say, of the project.
There are several interesting points, and I will go on them, basically build on them. I like very much when you mentioned the Europe as a liberal empire. So Barroso used to talk about it. So also, and certainly worse than an empire is a shrinking. So is a non-functional empire. The problem is that empires, they expand, but they can also shrink. Being an empire,
they disappear
too. It's a mode of governance, but it's an interesting way to approach what can be or what is maybe the European Union to some extent. The different waves of enlargement, what we notice also is, well, they have not been conducted or driven by merits. The European Union has been built on fragilities, and this is where I come back to your point about recognition. The countries which founded the European Union, they were collapsed empires themselves. So this is to save this, so their soul, or whatever you can call it, that they engage in this path while conducting wars outwards. So France and Algeria, for instance, still. And other countries which joined later in the East, they barely were countries or nations or states. They had a very short history of state. They had been satellites, oppressed, so had very little. They were also very fragile. So the European Union has a history of taking the fragility in itself to deal with it. And that might be actually, Václav Havel was talking in his speeches about the spirituality of European integration, looking not at the religious one, but the ethics, what's behind. And I come to you, Jovana. I need to mention, we need to point to the mutual benefits. That's one aspect. But when we talk about mutual benefits, we are in an instrumental logic of negotiations. We say, I can give you that, and you can give me that. That's a very thin, a very simplistic, and probably not a very inspirational motive for enlargement. Are we not missing something more inspirational, which we may have had before by just sticking on these security providers? Okay, the Western Balkans can be security providers, fine. Do we need to do it very shortly said? Does the enlargement policy has to be a win-win, so a calculation?
Well, it should be a win-win situation, both for the European Union and for the Western Balkans. First of all, the enlargement policy is one of the most successful policy of the European Union if the EU is not anymore able to provide democracy to the Western Balkans or the candidate countries which would like to join the EU, but also within its own borders in EU member states. That means that the EU is not pretending anymore, even pretending to be a global player. So the EU needs the Western Balkans and enlargement policy in order to show that it is still strong and it still has a goal to be a global player, a democracy provider, let's say in that way. But in order to be that, I guess that there should be the process of reforming both the enlargement policy and also not EU political system, but some of the procedures within the EU. And I don't see it as two separate processes. I see it as the one which, or the two which are going hand in hand. So the three, let's say, the directions in where the whole this story about strengthening democracy at the supranational level, at the level of the EU member states and in the Western Balkans should go, first of all, with reforming of decision-making process in the EU. The second one is, of course, that's also part of the reforming treaty of the EU, but the part which is securing democracy in the EU member states. And the third part is involving more citizens in the decision-making process. So the first one is about, I will focus, of course, on Western Balkans and the political decision-making, which now has primacy over the merit-based decision-making. This is something which is obvious from the last, let's say, attempt to prevent North Macedonia to open to open accession talks with the EU. So I guess that going back in the history of the EU, starting with the ordinary procedures and back in 60s when with the policy of the empty chair, which was by France in the Council, and then introducing qualified majority in the decision-making system of the European Union, there were many changes in the decision-making process of the European Union. So I guess the one about enlargement and about not blocking the country within the stages of the European integration process should be just one in that direction, and it would be really helpful for the Western Balkan countries in order to achieve more democracy. So member states not to have veto when voting about the moving within the European integration process, and especially when it comes to opening of the accession talks. The second thing is to find a way to resolve or solve the bilateral disputes in parallel with the democratization process and with the reforms which are implemented within the European integration process. So the second one is, of course, that as we are witnessing the lack of democracy and a backsliding of democracy in some of the EU member states, the second one should be reforming the procedure within the Treaty of the European Union in order to safeguard the democracy in the EU, at the EU level, I mean supranational level, but also in the Western Balkans, to use the same instruments at all three levels in order to achieve better level of democracy and to strengthen the rule of law. And in that direction, I guess that there should be more active member states in the Western Balkans. They are now discussing the possibility of suspending some funds in order to push the country to achieve better level of democracy. And this is something which is also announced for the Western Balkans as a part of the new enlargement methodology, as a part of these incentives and sanctions models. That's maybe it's not good for the Western Balkans perspective and their chances to join the EU, and that this whole story about inventing the new model in order to help the country to strengthen the rule of law and the democracy, all of these initiatives are focused on sanctions. So I guess that the focus should be also on incentives, just pushing the country to treating them with the suspension of funds and to some restrictions, and everything is not that much helpful, and that's not inspiration as such. So I guess that we should see more benefits as a part of this new enlargement model. And as I explained at the beginning, this is also something which should be used also for the EU member states. So this model should be tested on the Western Balkans, but then on the later stage used also for the EU member states. So we need to see more these concrete benefits for the citizens of the Western Balkans as roaming prices, or now we don't have that roaming prices in the Western Balkans, but to be included in some EU policies, to feel like part of not just the EU, but also part of Europe. As I said it during the first answer, we have better vision of the EU than those citizens in the EU. Around 70% of the Montenegrin citizens still want to join the EU, even though we are negotiating for 9 years, and we still don't know where this whole process leads. Not just because of we are not ready to join the EU because of the fulfillment of the criteria, but also because of the strategy of the EU with many ups and downs. So the third point which needs to be introduced, and the third level of reforms should be to include citizens more in the initiatives, and the one which is, let's say, the most popular in the EU is the European Citizens Initiative, but which is not that much popular or visible. I think that this initiative should be reformed in order to be more concrete and more visible and more known to the citizens of the European Union. Mm-hmm. So that's our concrete proposal for the reform of the system of the EU, which will be hopefully also beneficial for the Western Balkans.
So we start to have a little bit of picture. It's interesting how the enlargement of the EU intersects with the vision, or one of the visions we might still strive for the European Union. Diane is telling us that enlargement is about being recognized as equal, as normal, and that we should be careful about the costs of, not only costs, it's materialistic, but of rejection. That I hope that things will just get better may actually lead us to hell. That's a negative argument, but which is only seemingly negative, because it carries actually an ethics behind, which is interesting. Then Jovana is telling us that the widening of the European Union can actually contribute to its deepening, because we have a set of issues which are the same, and maybe opportunities to import or transfer solutions from here to there. Anita, what's your reflection about that? You're also given a lot of thoughts about what contribution the country of the region could do to a stronger European Union. Could you give us a couple of very concrete examples?
Well, I'm smiling at the moment because during last year and this year we had focus groups that we organized in all the Western Balkan countries, and it seems that the question of contribution coming from the Western Balkans was the hardest question that we asked to the citizens coming from Western Balkan countries. It seems like we are not aware about the benefits that we can give to the European Union, and that we are becoming more and more pessimist than we do not have that optimism anymore that we had like 2, 3, or 4 years ago. And I think that this is because it seems that European Union is not ready enough to listen to the Western Balkan countries, to listen to our proposals, and the proposals coming from the Western Balkan representatives, because the European Union is really preoccupied at the moment with their own problems. And it seems that the problems and issues that are happening in the Western Balkan countries are not the ones that they want to put on their daily agenda. But when we think about the contribution that the Western Balkan countries can give to the European Union, and if we are aware of all the problems that we have, and we are aware that by joining to the European Union, the problems will not be solved. For example, yesterday I spoke as a panelist on Taxo conference, and we had the examples coming from Croatia as the member state about certain issues that were part of this panel. And they told us that it seems that the best example is the example in Croatia, but there are more and more issues that need to be solved. So as someone who is the member of the European Union, that does not mean that the problems are solved. So this is something that in the beginning should be the message from the Western Balkan countries. We will give our contribution, but in the end, this is not the end of our problems, but we are there to face our problems. When it comes to the Western Balkan countries, I think that we are not only the parking space, as someone told us during the focus group, that Western Balkan countries are only the parking space for the EU member states, or that we are just there to be the medical center for the future and for the already member states. I think that the Western Balkan countries firstly can serve as an example of diversity, and in this regard we can help to the European Union to oppose these rhetorics that the European Union is only for the elites, that it's only the union that the elites can join without these problems and issues that we are facing in the Western Balkan countries. Moreover, by not having that by having non-coherence when it comes to the Western Balkan countries, the European Union is leaving room to other countries with this strategic interest in the region, like China, like Russia, like Turkey. And I think that if the goal of European Union is that united Europe, then this is something that is that goes in favor of the Western Balkan countries. So our geographical position is something that can be used as one of the positive arguments that we are the in the neighborhood of the member states, and that by involving us, the European Union certainly will not have the strong Russia, China, Turkey in its neighborhood, especially if we consider the new geographical situation in the world and in the Europe. And this is one of the threats that European Union is facing at the moment. With these superpowers in the neighborhood, definitely the disintegration of European Union is more certain. So in this regard, we can definitely use our geographical position, and we can ask for our place, and we can ask for the European Union to get us involved in all the debates and discussions about the future of Europe. Also, when it comes to the Western Balkan countries and our contribution, I think that European Union would expand its market. Definitely, they will get the qualified human capital, not the cheap, not the cheaper human capital, but qualified human capital, and the people who are really and who have the expertise, who are ready and willing to work. Also, I think that European Union would gain more stability. The borders would be stronger, and in the end, the European Union would get stronger strategically with the Western Balkan countries involved. Also, we've shown that during the pandemic period that we are really the countries who have the solidarity on a really high level, and that we can answer to the challenges that we were facing, because in the beginning of the pandemic, even the EU didn't have the answers to the pandemic. Moreover, I think that coming from the European Union, the courage, the determination, and solidarity is needed from them to get back to the thought of a deeper purpose of integration, because it seems that even the citizens of Western Balkan countries are losing hope that one day they will be part of the European Union, and they are giving up from the European Union as the main ally of Western Balkan countries. And I think that people in European Union, but also in Western Balkan countries, should have that sense of belonging with the European Union, and they should have the sense that European Union values are the right one for the future, and that we have that ally in European Union. But the message should be also given from the European Union leaders, not only coming from the Western Balkan countries.
It's interesting, a sense of belonging. This is one of the key words the French will put for the presidency. You said the citizens, so the horizon of citizens shall not just stop at accession. And I think it's quite important to reflect a little bit on that, because there is some potential for the region to be a model with that, I believe. You don't become just magically EU citizen by getting in the EU. Just the same way you don't become EU citizen by becoming 18. You have to become citizen by getting engaged and trained and interested. That's a process. What is interesting is that the citizen building process of the EU in the region rests on accession. You're not citizen before, you suddenly become citizens after. In terms of formation or training or building or preparing citizens, that's extremely a bad model, I would say. We might look at what is done in the region on the EU side. In RICO, for instance, this period of time, 14 to 18-year-olds, is extremely important in how identities are built. We have in the region, the RICO with Super School versus projects. We have tools, we have initiatives we don't have in the EU. We have the OFAGE, we have bilateral exchange of students, so schools, but that's only bilateral. I wish we would have some kind of European RICO. We can just take the template, we can just join the RICO, so from the EU side. It's already there. And it's all about reconciliation. Okay, you can turn it around. It's about cooperation, isn't it? So, I mean, there is room, if we look at the region a bit differently, there is room for getting inspired too. I would like to open the floor to questions, either from the room or from the viewers. Please, it's also an exercise of exchange. We're all talking about future of Europe, so feel free to voice your contribution and to criticize.
In the meantime, I mean, while we are waiting, yes, just to break the silence, maybe I can
I'm very comfortable with the silence.
So, no,
but please, Dan.
That's perfectly fine. I know silence is intimidating. Eventually, somebody will raise hand.
Exactly. Please.
So anyway, no, I think I agree basically with what Anita said earlier. But just, I think it's an image that we are building about ourselves as well. I mean, we live in a world of images, and in as much as the merits are important, there's also the way how we imagine the others, but also how we present ourselves. And one of the signs of this long-term objectivization rather than subjectivization of the Western Balkans is that we tend to think of ourselves in negative terms rather than in positive. And that we tend to be passive, therefore waiting for others to come and help us. And especially to help us crush the others, the neighbors that we don't like, but we can't, remove somehow from our scene. And I think this is a problem. It's a consequence of this not being included. So I think it's really important that we within the region start thinking of ourselves in more positive terms. So for example, if we look like those 9 topics for the conference on Europe, I mean, the region is not at the end, it's not at the bottom in all of these topics. There are some areas where I think we have seen rather good examples from the Western Balkans. Let's start with, for example, health. Well, something that seemed to be problematic 10 years ago, and this is that the health system is not sufficiently commercialized, just like the educational system and so on and so forth, now seems to be advantage. I mean, the kind of social care, but also I think the response in the moment of crisis to pandemics in some of the countries of the Western Balkans, which have very quickly actually become an example of how you can actually get vaccines into the country, Serbia in the first place here. I mean, this has been noticed, and there is no reason that we always think, well, we are worse than the West. There are episodes and situations in which we are actually just equal. And then even in terms of integration and democracy, well, if Cyprus is in the European Union, if Hungary is in the European Union, well, how much worse is Bosnia and Serbia compared with these two? I mean, we shouldn't have this like negativity inbuilt in us. And then, when it comes to migration, a lot of people leaving, not really producing any major problems for European stability. A lot of people that have left this region have contributed very much to development and economic and other development in the West. And also the role these countries played in regulating migratory trends in Europe, I think that needs to be pointed out. And in educational field as well. I mean, we see commercialization in some of the countries. Okay, now, for example, Britain, which has left the European Union. And my colleagues, I mean, I've lived in Britain and worked in Britain for a long time. There are a lot of colleagues who are coming to me and who are saying, well, this commercialization of the higher education has actually spoiled some disciplines completely, social sciences and humanities. This is not yet the case in some of the countries of the Western Balkans. So there is a chance, and we need to start thinking of ourselves as being children that need to be taught and taken by hand by somebody else and taught what we should do and we shouldn't do. We need to become subjects of our own history somehow.
Mm-hmm. I think when you think about it, that's a very, very provocative idea, because it touches on one of the cornerstones of the approach towards the region, which is conditionality, merit-based approach. But that's also, we have two ways when things are not working. Either we try harder and we try to quantify even more what is unquantifiable sometimes. We try to make tougher, to raise the bar, to define even more specifically every single thing. Or we question the morality or the ethics behind this emphasis or this target of merit. And I think this is what you point rightly here. The idea of merit conveys the implication that you're not deserving enough something. You're lower, and that's very much related with merits. It brings, unfortunately, a drawback. There are many positive things in merits, but there are risks. The hybrids of the winner. We have the ones like Bulgaria. They get in the club. They are very happy. They deserve it to be in the club. So that's how you show your superiority somehow. There's also the neglection of luck. I mean, who chose the complexity of Bosnia? I mean, in the end, merit is also about luck. Or Kosovo, some of the issues. And you have this idea of the feeling of rejection of those who are the losers, which may rise over time. So that should bring us some thoughts that maybe the approach we are so much relying is more limited than we think in its ethics.
I mean, Bosnia, for example, I mean, you may say Dayton has failed because there is no progress in almost any field, and this is what we hear. But at the same time, Dayton has succeeded because in the last 25 years, there was not one single attempt to really start violence in Bosnia. I lived through the 1990s and early. 1993, if you were asked, if anyone asked you, do you expect once this war in Bosnia stops, that there will be a peace with no major attempt to resume violence 25 years since? I mean, very few people would say, well, yeah, actually, there will be no attempts to resume violence. And we see violent extremism in other parts of Europe too. We don't see it actually in such, there was no, no major, not a serious attempt to restart the violence. The rhetoric is one thing, but the other thing is violence. And I think we need to, therefore, it's our choice, whether we say Dayton's failed, something needs to be done, or we say Dayton has succeeded and therefore it's been positive in a way. It's probably both, but we always point out one direction rather than positive as well.
Before we go for the concluding,
yes.
So around, any question from the room or comments? Yes, but now we have many.
Yes.
Please.
As professor, as a former student here in Belgrade, I remember the idea that we discussed in faculty of immediate accession of all Western Balkan countries in the EU. So I'm interested if there is any alternative that could substitute this idea, as it is obvious that this idea will not happen in this moment. Thank you.
Thank you. I will collect the questions and then we will do the final round. Marco?
Thank you. I participated in one of the workshops that was organized in Belgrade, Floran, you remember, and one of the most intriguing questions for me, I mean for my part of the group, was what do you as Western Balkans bring to Europe? The stereotypical question, super stereotypical question, I know, but still it's intriguing. And we had a writer, a famous writer, Vladimir Arsenijevich with us in the group, and we were all looking at him, you know, hoping that he will say something, you know, on the lines of, well, you know, culture, we're a European country, we're in Europe. I mean, now I would really like to hear from the panel, but, you know, not in a, if you could go beyond, you know, not maybe answer with the most, because what is it that we are bringing?
Okay. Mm-hmm. There was, yes, shortly.
Thank you. I have a question about the challenges or the obstacles of joining EU in EU countries. So I have my opinion of Serbia and Serbia's path, but now the Montenegro and Bosnia are aspiring to become EU members. So what are the biggest challenges? And for Professor Jovic, what was the biggest challenge or the biggest obstacle in joining EU? Was it public opinion, local politicians, or the EU itself, or maybe something else?
Mm-hmm. Thank you. I will just add a question to you, a final one. How to make these conferences on the future of Europe more successful than the debates on the future of Europe, which ended with the Laeken Declaration, the Constitutional Treaty, with failure of the Constitutional Treaty, the Treaty of Lisbon, and the growth of intergovernmentalism, the decay of federalism in Europe. How to make it better? What lessons to draw from previous failures? So you can pick up, you have 2 minutes each. Let's start with Jonida.
Oh, well, I will start with the last question about the challenges in Bosnia and Herzegovina. And unfortunately, I have to say that the major challenge and the main issue in Bosnia and Herzegovina is this local politicians, daily political issues, not having that political interest, not having that, and I hate to say it, I have to say that I hate to say it, but that political will to leave that status quo in the country and to start working not only on the reform processes regarding the European integration, but also internal issues that are just that are for years now just stopped in the place, because they are actors, they are stakeholders that are working in the country, but in the end the decision makers and actually the leaders of the political parties who are in charge in the countries are in favor of this status quo, and nothing is happening, and we all know that in the end everything is on the decision makers. So I would say that again it's that political will and political interest that is stopping the processes in Bosnia and Herzegovina. And one more thing, and I think that there can be answer to more of the questions, that we are always, and I think that this is not the only issue in Bosnia and Herzegovina, we are always waiting for the mentors. We are always waiting for someone to show us the way, to tell us what to do. And it seems that we in the Western Balkan countries are always trying to be the victims in the process, and the situation should be the opposite. We should definitely impose our ourselves, and we should show our role as someone who can contribute to the process and who can answer to the challenges. And we should show that we are not the countries who are just there for the enlargement process, because we know that, for example, Bosnia and Herzegovina, we will wait for years. But
Thank you. Joanna?
Well, this question about whether the EU to integrate the Western Balkan countries at the moment as a region, is all 6 at once. Just the one joke about Montenegro and the current state of play in the country, as we are really a small country with just 600,000 of citizens, and without open bilateral disputes, I guess that the EU should integrate Montenegro as a good example of enlargement policy and as a motivation to the rest of the Western Balkans. Just the joke aside, I think that there is not another scenario for the Western Balkans, and now we are not even sure where this whole process lays because of the policy of the. I think that the EU does not have a clear vision about the Western Balkans at all, and it's also this new enlargement methodology is not going well. Its implementation and adaptation to Montenegro and in Serbia. Because of this non-readiness of the EU to strengthen the policy and to invest more in democratization of the Western Balkans. The second question about what is the biggest obstacle in Montenegro. Montenegro is an example of even when you have political will to fight corruption and organized crime, that the things are not going well. After 30 years of rule of the same party, we managed to change it during the last year's elections. And now we have this determination and the political will, but we have this situation in judiciary, and we have the conditionality policy of the EU, which is forcing the broad consensus about the topics in the judiciary, and we are a deeply polarized society we are not able to find this consensus for the important reforms.
Thank you, Anna.
Right, there were 2 questions, 2 minutes. Okay, first of all, alternatives. There are alternatives. You know, the story about there is no alternative, I don't buy it. So alternatives are either for these countries to try to organize some kind of regional association, which we see attempts through the so-called Open Balkans, semi-successful so far, or to try to create a new balance of powers by including the other great powers, including China, Russia, and the United States and the European Union, and to try to secure stability outwith of the European Union, but through balancing of powers involved by the others. There are also some attempts to create integration on ethnic grounds, both by Albanians through self-determination movement and Serbski Svet on the other side. I don't think this is helpful, and it's standing on the way to European integration and integration of the region. What can we bring to? I think if we look 9 areas here, in 5 I think we can contribute something. Health, that's number 1, I explained already. EU in the world, by basically disadvantaging the others and promoting the European influence in the European continent. Digital transformation, I think that's the area where actually we can do something, especially younger generation. Migration issues, both in terms of like preventing undesirable migration and contributing to desirable migration, and education, culture, youth. I mean, I think these 5 areas we can do something. Not much on the European democracy, on climate change, although we have a wonderful coastal area and so on and so forth, and not much really on economy, social justice, and workplace at the moment. But crucial moment, I think, is this. We can bring to Europe self-confidence that the Europe has, I wouldn't say has lost, but has been shaken very much by Brexit and by Hungary-Exit or whatever ideas, radical right and so on and so forth, which is undermining the European project. And we can finally enable European Union to become a hegemon in the European continent, something they promised back in 1992 to themselves, never materialized, and actually reduce American and other influences in Europe, in the heart of Europe, if possible, if we can do that. I'm not sure whether we can do that, but that would be an advantage.
There is no summary needed, just a small announcement. We will, so with the support of the Friedrich Ebert Stiftung and 10 of your colleagues, so you're working on a manifesto, Western Balkan Manifesto on the future of Europe, which we'll publish in the beginning of the year. So this is an ongoing discussion. I would like just to thank all of you. Thank you to the panelists. Thank you in the public for your questions and interests. And as I say, it's an ongoing discussion. Goodbye.
Thank you.